The winter that arrived at Ashveil Park in 1821 did not come gently. It came the way ruin comes, quietly at first, then all at once, deadly. The chimneys smoked badly that year because the flashing had not been repaired, and the housekeeper, Mrs. Poole, had taken to leaving small fires unlit rather than waste coal on rooms nobody used. The portrait gallery stayed cold from October onward. The east wing dripped when it rained. And Lord Arlen Foss, 53 years old and softer about the middle than he had once been, sat each evening in his study, pretending to read correspondence that was, in fact, almost entirely composed of notices from creditors. His eldest daughter did not know the full extent of it, or rather, she had been told a version of it, a softened, edited version in which things were temporarily difficult and would resolve themselves by spring. Genevieve had long ago learned to translate her father's language into plain terms, and she understood that spring was not a season he was referring to. It was a hope, and hopes, in her experience, had a way of costing more than the things they deferred. She was 26. Mother had died when she was 15, leaving behind a small income that was tied in trust, a good library, and a gift for silence that Genevieve had inherited so completely that some people mistook it for coldness. She was not cold, She was simply a person who had learned early that speaking before you understood something was almost always worse than waiting. Her younger sister, Arabella, not learned this lessons and showed no interest in learning it. Arabella was 21, and she entered every room the way a lamp enters a dark space, suddenly, warmly, and making everything else look dimmer by comparison. She was not unkind. That was the thing Genevieve had always held on to on the difficult days. Arabella was not unkind. She was simply entirely, constitutionally unaware of the space she occupied, the air she consumed, the way every eye in a room swiveled toward her, without her having done a single deliberate thing to earn it. When the letter arrived from Mr. Collier of Gray's Inn, Genevieve was in the kitchen garden, which was the one part of Ashveil that still looked as it should. She grew things there. Practical things, herbs, root vegetables, a small bed of lavender because her mother had loved it. She was kneeling in the cold, pulling up the last of the parsnips before the ground froze solid when the under-footman came to find her. Her father wanted her in the study, dear. She washed her hands at the pump, dried them on her apron, and went. Lord Foss was standing at the window when she entered. He did not turn immediately, which told her the news was not good. He turned to windows when he needed a moment to arrange his face. The letter was on the desk. She picked it up without being invited to, which was one of the things that would have shocked Arabella and did not shock her father at all. He had stopped expecting Genevieve to perform daintiness some years ago. The letter was from a solicitor acting on behalf of a man named Viscount Hawthorn, Julian Hawthorn, to be precise, of Carrow Hall in Derbyshire. Recently returned from 4 years abroad and presently, per the solicitor's careful language, seeking to establish a suitable domestic arrangement. Carrow Hall had debts of its own. It also had a viscount who had apparently decided that the solution to his difficulties was a wife with money. Genevieve had £20,000 from her grandmother, held in trust and inaccessible, until she married or turned 35, whichever came first. She knew this. The solicitor knew this. The Viscount, it appeared, also knew this. She set the letter down. Her father said, carefully, "He comes with very good references." "He comes," Genevieve said. a solicitor and a ledger. Genevieve. I am not objecting, Father. I am simply naming it accurately. He was quiet for a moment. At our side, the wind had picked up, and one of the loose shutters on the east wing began its familiar banging. Neither of them remarked on it. After a while, her father said, "The man is titled. If his family is old, his situation is not unlike ours. He is in debt. Many men are in debt. It does not make a man bad." "No," she agreed, "it does not." She picked up the letter again. Read the last paragraph. "He is coming in a fortnight to call." Did he? Will Arabella be presented as well? Her father looked at the window again. The solicitor suggests he is specifically interested in. There is a mention of a trust and of the elder daughter. "Then he has done his research," Genevieve said. "Good. I prefer a man who does his research." She left the study. In the hallway, Arabella was waiting, because Arabella always seemed to know when something interesting was happening and positioned herself accordingly. "Well," she said, "Count is coming to look us over." Arabella's eyes widened, then brightened. "A Viscount? Is he young?" "I don't know." "Is he handsome?" The letter did not specify. "Oh, Ginny!" Arabella caught her arm. "Don't be like that. This could be wonderful. This could change everything." Genevieve looked at her sister for a moment. She had her mother's eyes, their mother's eyes, large and dark and full of a kind of light that some people spent their whole lives chasing and never quite catching. She was wearing a day dress that should have looked ordinary, and somehow did not. Even her worry was pretty. "Yes," Genevieve said, "it could." She went upstairs. The Viscount arrived on a Tuesday in early December in a carriage that was well maintained but not ostentatious, which she noted again. A man who wanted to impress would have hired something flashier. Either he did not want to impress, or he was too honest to pretend to resources he didn't have. Both possibilities interested her. She was at the library window when the carriage came up the drive, so she saw him before he saw anyone. He stepped out, tall, dark-coated, bareheaded despite the cold, and stood for a moment looking at the house with an expression she couldn't quite read at that distance. Not admiring, not dismissive either. Evaluating, perhaps, the way a person evaluates something they are considering taking responsibility for. Then he looked up, and she stepped back from the window. Arabella had spent the morning in a state of barely contained excitement that manifested as 3 changes of dress, a great deal of consultation with the housemaid about hair, and a suggestion that Genevieve might do something about her own appearance that Genevieve received without comment. She was wearing a good wool dress in deep blue, practical, well cut, not new. Her hair was pinned the way she always pinned it, simply without ornament. She had cleaned her hands very carefully, and there was still a faint trace of earth under her left thumbnail that she had decided not to worry about. She came downstairs when she heard the bell. Viscount Hawthorn, Julian, was standing in the entry hall with her father when she reached the bottom of the stairs. He was perhaps 30, perhaps a little more. His face was weathered in the way that came from actually being outdoors, rather than the fashionable pretense of it. He was good-looking in an unremarkable way, the kind of face that would improve, she thought, on further acquaintance. He was speaking to her father about the roads, and he broke off when he saw her. He did not look at her the way men usually looked at her, which was to say, not in the way they looked at Arabella. There was none of that subtle recalibration, that microscopic adjustment of expectation downward. He simply looked steadily for a moment and then said, "Miss Foss," and inclined his head. "Viscount Hawthorn," she said, "welcome to Ashveil." Then Arabella came down the stairs, and the room shifted. It always shifted. Genevieve stepped aside slightly. Not from habit, so much as from simple spatial awareness. She knew from experience that staying in the direct line between Arabella and a new arrival was like standing between a candle and a moth. But she noticed, with a kind of detached interest, that the Viscount did not turn immediately. He waited a half-beat longer than most men did before his attention moved. Tea was served in the drawing-room. Genevieve poured. Arabella talked. She was genuinely charming when she talked, warm and quick, with the ability to make whoever she was speaking to feel as though they were the most interesting person in the room. Lord Hawthorn smiled at the right moments. He asked sensible questions. He was polite, but once, just once, when Arabella was describing a musical evening they had attended the previous spring, he glanced across at Genevieve. She was holding her cup. Mia. She was watching her sister with the small private affection she always felt for Arabella when Arabella was being her most herself, which was, she had always thought, a purer kind of love than admiration, because it did not require anything in return. The Viscount was watching her watch her sister. She did not acknowledge it, ever. She refilled his cup when it was empty and said nothing. He came back 3 days later. This was not, strictly speaking, part of the expected protocol. A first visit was followed by a period of consideration. One did not simply return, and yet he returned and gave as his reason, to her father, in the hallway, that he had left his gloves. He had not left his gloves. She had noticed them on his hands as he departed. She was in the library when her father came to find her, looking more hopeful than he had in months, and said that the Viscount wondered if she might show him the garden. The garden was grey and bare, and there was a skin of ice on the bird bath. "Of course," she said. She collected her coat and went out through the side door, and he was already there, walking slowly along the path between the dormant rose beds. He had no gloves on, which confirmed that the gloves had been a pretext, though she chose not to say so. They walked in silence for a moment. Then he said, "Do you know why I really came back? I expect you'll tell me." "I'm not sure I know entirely," he said, which surprised her. She had expected a more managed response. "I wanted to ask you something that I couldn't ask in the drawing room." "Then ask it." He stopped walking. The wind moved through the bare branches of the elm at the garden's edge. "When your sister was talking," he said, "you looked at her the way, I don't know how to put this accurately, envy, and it was not resentment. It was something else." She looked at him. "What was it?" "I wasn't sure, that's why I came back." She was quiet for a moment, looking at the frozen bird bath, at the dead stems of the roses, at the track her own boots had made in the frost on the grass. "She has always been that way," she said at last, simply. "Arabella is Sorn. She came into the world with something that most people spend their lives looking for. I am glad for her. It is not a performance," he said. "I could see that. Most people can't." He looked at her. "Most people aren't paying attention to you when she is in the room." She met his eyes then, steadily. "No," she agreed. "They are not." There was nothing coy in how she said it. No invitation, no deflection. Just the plain fact of it acknowledged without self-pity, which was a thing she had always believed, was more dignified than either denying it or being wounded by it for a moment. Then he said, "Tell me about the garden." So she did. She walked him through it, the kitchen beds, the herb garden her mother had designed, and the place, against the south wall, where she had been trying for 3 years to coax a fig tree into producing anything at all. She talked about soil and drainage, and the particular stubbornness of the clay beneath the topsoil. She talked about which plants overwinter and which don't, and what her mistakes had cost her, and what she had learned from them. He listened, not politely, genuinely. He asked questions that suggested he had actually heard what she said, not merely waited for a gap in which to speak. By the time they reached the gate at the garden's far end, the light was going. "Are not what I expected," he said. "No," she said, "I rarely am." "Is that difficult?" She considered it. "Less difficult than being what people expect," she said. "I have watched that closely enough." He smiled then, really smiled, not the managed expression from the drawing room. It made him look younger and more human, and she thought again that his face would improve on acquaintance. "I should like to come back again," he said. "If you'll permit it." "My father will permit it," she said. "I wasn't asking your father." She looked at him for a moment. The garden was very quiet. "Yes," she said. "Come back." He came back 5 more times before Christmas, each time Arabella, who was dressed and ready and positioned. Arabella, who asked if he would like to hear her play. Arabella, who arranged herself at advantageous angles near the good light. Arabella, who laughed at exactly the right moments. And Genevieve, each time, came in late and sat near the window and said little, and was asked by Julian to walk in the garden. Arabella noticed, eventually. It was a Sunday, the week before Christmas, and they were in Genevieve's room, and Arabella sat on the edge of the bed and was quiet for longer than she usually was, and then said, "He prefers you." Genevieve looked up from the book she was not really reading. "I don't know that." "I know it," Arabella said. "Ginny, he barely looks at me anymore." She put the book down. "Arabella?" "No, I'm not upset." And she didn't look upset. She looked thoughtful, which was unusual enough that Genevieve paid attention. "I am trying to understand it. I have been thinking about it. What is it that you do that I don't do?" "I don't do anything." "That's not true." Arabella frowned, very slightly, in the way that meant she was genuinely working something out. "When he asks you a question, you answer the actual question. You don't look to see how it lands. You just say the thing." She paused. "I always look to see how it lands," Genevieve said, carefully. "You have never needed to do otherwise." "No," Arabella said. "I haven't." She was quiet again then. "Is it nice, not looking?" "Sometimes." Genevieve smiled a little. "Sometimes it is just lonely." Arabella looked at her for a long moment, and something shifted in her expression. Not pity, which would have been unbearable, but recognition. Particular recognition of someone who has always been loved and has only just understood that love takes different shapes. "I'm sorry," she said, "that I've taken up so much room." "I have. I know I have. I've always known somewhere, and I preferred not to look." She stood up, straightened her skirt, and said briskly, it in the way she said difficult things, quickly, so they were over. "He is a good man. I think you would be happy." Genevieve said nothing. "You would be," Arabella said firmly, as though settling the matter. "Don't be an idiot about it." She left. Genevieve sat with the unread book for a while. Outside, the first real snow of winter had begun to fall. Julian came on Christmas Eve, which was not planned and not announced. He arrived in the late afternoon with a hamper from the market town. Things for the kitchen, useful things. Tea, a plum cake, because he had apparently asked and been told that Lord Foss was partial to plum cake, and was cheerfully received by everyone, including Arabella, who greeted him with warm, uncomplicated friendliness, and then very deliberately found reasons to be elsewhere. He noticed, of course he noticed, he found Genevieve in the library, which was where she always was when she was not in the garden, adding wood to the fire with the efficient economy of someone who had learned not to waste a good log. "Your sister," he said. "Yes," she said. "Is she matchmaking?" "She is clearing the field," Genevieve said, "which is something entirely different and considerably more generous." He sat down in the chair by the hearth without being invited, which by now she had grown used to. It sat in her father's house the way a person sits when they have started, without quite meaning to think of it as also theirs. "I want to speak plainly," he said. "I have found," she said, sitting across from him, "that plain speech is always preferable to the alternative. I came here to find a wife," he said, "a practical arrangement. Specifically, my solicitor identified you, your trust, specifically, and the fact that it was tied to marriage, and the fact that my estate situation and your father's situation were, in certain ways, complementary." He paused. "I want you to know that, because it would be dishonest not to. I did not come here because I heard that you were remarkable. I came here because of a number in a ledger." She looked at him without flinching. "I know, and then," he said, "I met you." The fire crackled. Outside, someone was moving in the hall, and then wasn't. "I have not said anything I did not mean in any of our conversations," he said. "Every question I asked did die. I asked because I wanted to know the answer. Every time I came back, it was because the conversation before had been. I kept thinking about it afterward, and I am not a man who usually thinks much about conversations afterward." He looked at her steadily. "I am asking you. I want to ask you, not your trust, not your father, whether you would consider marrying me." She looked at him for a long time. She thought about the ledger. She thought about the chimneys that smoked, and the loose shutter, and the parsnips she had pulled from the frozen ground. She thought about being 26 years old, and having spent most of those 26 years standing slightly outside whatever light was available, watching her sister absorb it all and loving her for it, and finding that love sufficient most of the time, and not finding it sufficient all of the time, and never having said so to anyone. She thought about the way he had listened to her talk about soil drainage and the stubborn fig tree. "You heard me," she said. "Yes. In the garden, I was talking about the clay. You were actually listening." "I was," he said. "Most people don't listen to that kind of thing." "No," he agreed. "I expect they don't." She looked at the fire for a moment. Then she looked at him. "I want you to understand something," she said. "I will manage your household. I will be honest with you always, even when it is inconvenient. I will work alongside you, not behind you." "I will not perform contentment when I am not content, and I will not pretend certainty when I have none. I am not easy, and I am not particularly charming, and I have been told I am difficult to know." With Ori, she paused. "Those things are true, I know," he said. "You have been warned." "Thoroughly," he said, and there was something in his expression, dry and warm, and entirely without performance, that she found she had been waiting for without knowing she was waiting for it. She said, "Yes, then, I will marry you." The settlement was signed in the second week of January. The legal language was careful and mutual, her trust against his title and his estate, and a settlement that ensured she could never be left without recourse, which had been her one firm condition, and which he had agreed to without hesitation. Her father wept a little, quietly, when it was done, and then recovered himself and spoke for 10 minutes about the repairs he intended to commission for the East Wing, with an energy he had not shown in years. Arabella cried more openly, and then laughed at herself for crying. "I'm being ridiculous," she said. "It's good news, Kitchen. It is the best possible news." She wiped her eyes and looked at Genevieve and said, "Are you happy?" Genevieve considered the question with the same honest attention she gave to all questions. "I think," she said, "that I am going to be." Arabella threw her arms around her, which was not something Genevieve had been expecting, and held on for a moment, and Genevieve let herself be held without stiffening, which was for her a significant act. "That's enough," Arabella said firmly, pulling back. "That's enough for anyone." In March, when the ground had softened enough to work, Genevieve went out to the kitchen garden at Carrow Hall for the first time. It was larger than she had expected and badly neglected, beds choked with dead growth, tools left out over winter and beginning to rust, a greenhouse with 2 panes missing on the south side. She stood in the middle of it for a while, seeing what it could be. Julian came out, eventually, with 2 cups of tea. He handed her one. He did not tell her what to do with the garden or how to begin. He stood beside her and looked at it with her. "Time," she said. "Yes," he said, "a full season before I'll know what's actually here and what's been lost. Then we'll know by next spring." She looked at the rusted gate at the garden's far end, the unpruned apple trees along the wall, the pale sky above the broken greenhouse. She thought about all the patient work of it, the digging, the clearing, the slow returning of things to what they could be. She took a sip of her tea. "Yes," she said, "we will."